Hey folks, I figure if I'm going to do a channel on my journey with MCS, then I should probably explain what it is for those of you who don't know. MCS, or multiple chemical sensitivity, is a condition where you react to various chemicals, especially to VOCs. VOCs are basically smell molecules. They're carbon-based molecules that are given off by everything from, a flower to, polyurethane that you're using to like finish a piece of furniture. So basically they are everywhere, and they're not inherently like a bad thing, but generally speaking, high concentrations of VOCs are known to cause health problems. So symptoms can range from mental to physical, and some common physical reactions include respiratory distress. It could be an actual like asthma type attack, vocal cord dysfunction, which is when your vocal cords spasm, which narrows the opening that you breathe through. And it was also very uncomfortable. I deal with it myself. It feels like, I'm getting choked when I'm having an attack. Different, neuropathy and nerve pain, those kinds of things. Some people even get anaphylaxis, which is more of a traditional allergy reaction, like, the kid who couldn't even look at peanut butter, or else he'd have have to get the EpiPen. So it can be a wide range of symptoms, and I'm sure there are more that I haven't covered, but it is a systemic condition. That's one thing to keep in mind. So it can affect every organ. And then you have the mental symptoms, which can include brain fog, anxiety, agitation, short-term memory issues, irritability. And how can a condition cause such a sort of wide range of symptoms? Well, it's because there are something called mast cells in the body. This is a type of immune cell. It's present all over the body, and its job is to basically release something called mediators when your body is faced with some sort of threat. And there's hundreds of different mediators that these mast cells can release, just different sort of compounds. And the point of these mediators is that when they're released, it kind of signals your immune system to go and take care of whatever the threat is. So it's kind of almost like a beacon that instructs your immune system to go fight, an invader or a toxin or whatever it might be. And in people with multiple chemical sensitivity, they've become so sensitized to these chemicals that are just all around us today that basically your body is perceiving like everything as a threat. And that's actually a protective mechanism, because people who have multiple chemical sensitivity are dealing with chronic toxicity, where the body literally just cannot handle any more toxins because there are more coming in than the body is able to flush out. Which in the modern day and age, some people genetically are better at detoxing than others, and so there's a good subset of people, some of which have MCS, some of which have other symptoms, that are suffering because of just the toxicity. And MCS can be caused by either an acute exposure to chemicals or a chronic exposure. These days, many people are dealing with chronic exposure just because everything, from our clothes has fire retardants, formaldehyde that it's processed with. Personal care products, phthalates, parabens, all sorts of chemicals that are proven to be bad for you, but the regulation is really lacking around those things, and it can just become too much for somebody. And over time, that toxicity can accumulate, not to mention pesticides, food additives, all sorts of things like that. And then you have people who have an acute exposure. For some people, that's going to be, an occupational exposure. There's like a chemical spill, or there was actually a big, I believe it was in the early 90s, an issue where at the EPA Building, the Government Environmental Protection Agency, where there was a new carpet installed and hundreds of people got sick, and some are on permanent disability to this day. So it can just be a big influx of chemicals. But either way, it's essentially the body not being able to tolerate toxicity anymore because it's overwhelmed. And then another huge factor in multiple chemical sensitivity is mold exposure. And, people think of mold as like, something that is visible. We've all been into that old home or seen like a car that's just carpeted in like, I don't know, white fuzzy stuff, or just this black mold, which is notorious for causing health issues. And that's kind of an extreme example. A lot of times there's just a little bit of an HVAC system or something hiding behind a wall. Anytime you get a musty smell, that means there's mold. So most buildings actually have a certain level of mold. And depending on your natural ability to detoxify from that and the amount that you're getting exposed to, the toxins that the mold releases in the body are known to be very sensitizing to the immune system. So usually it's some sort of connection between or combination of chemical exposure and mold exposure, either chronic or acute. And many people with MCS do also have a reaction to mold, myself included. So I'm going to cover some misconceptions about MCS. The first most common one that many of us are super used to hearing from, be it society at large or just a doctor that we're working with, is that this is something that's in our head. It's something that's psychological. And this is not an argument that I'm going to devote too much time to, because ultimately people tend to believe what they want to believe. But I am going to drop some links in the description that show how in the 90s, MCS, which at the time was mostly referred to as environmental illness, was actually gaining traction in the modern medical system as something that is a rising threat as a result of all the chemicals that we're dealing with, partially because of that story with the EPA, and then there were other sort of well-known cases, and news was starting to cover various different situations where people were getting sick. And ultimately, just like the tobacco industry did in the 50s, there was a very concerted effort among chemical companies to lobby and to essentially put out hit pieces to discredit it. So that's part of where that misconception comes from. Part of it is also just because it is something that is many people perceive as like unusual, and it is something that I probably would have had a really hard time wrapping my head around until I personally experienced it. But it's something we're reacting to, something that's invisible to most people, and I think that it's hard for people to kind of wrap their head around an abstract threat, although really these are physical compounds, but you can't see them, and most people don't react to the smells. So the way that this condition can cause so many neurological and psychological symptoms is through the activation of these mast cells, specifically in the brain. Actually, 50% of our brain cells are called glial cells. The other 50% are neurons, but the glial cells are essentially the mast cells of the brain. And it's a very, very sophisticated immune system that our brains have developed, over the years. And when the toxicity in the body reaches the brain, these glial cells release all sorts of mediators, which then instructs your immune system to essentially, clear out the area. But what's happening in the meantime is there's a lot of collateral damage, and your brain is literally getting inflamed because of that reaction. And so, while there's a lot of overlap with what people consider like, traditional mental illness, many people with MCS feel fine until they have an exposure. And that exposure causes awful symptoms that usually are a combination of mental and physical. And I also want to sort of clarify that it's not a reaction to smells per se. So there is research that shows that in people with MCS that there is unusual activity in the brain when the olfactory center, which is the part of your brain that processes smell, is activated, and that it actually causes, there's some research that shows that it is that the kindling effect is involved, the kindling effect is involved, which is a type of process in the brain that's actually associated also with epilepsy, where it's essentially a sensitization mechanism. So every time we come in contact with a certain trigger, the brain activity becomes more and more intense. And so different fragrances can indeed cause reactions, but it's not just the fragrance. Like if, for example, cologne is spread on my body, or laundry detergent that I'm sitting on, I will get systemic reactions from that as well. So it is not the reactions of the fragrance itself, it's actually the chemical, because the body is overwhelmed by toxicity. But it's basically kind of a two-tier reaction. A lot of times the first indicator that we have that we're in the presence of a chemical that could be harmful to us is the smell. And so the body has actually evolved sort of this fight or flight inflammatory response to kind of get out ahead of the toxicity. And it's a protective mechanism at the end of the day, but it can essentially make it so that our reaction is a lot stronger if we're also smelling the thing that we're experiencing, that we've come in contact with. And then I also just want to kind of clarify that multiple chemical sensitivity isn't only a reaction to artificial, chemicals. One thing that's really important to kind of grasp is that anytime that we're smelling anything, that's because particles of that thing are traveling in the air and actually are latching onto receptors that are in our nose. So, be it food that's cooking, the smell of exhaust that we're experiencing on the road. These are things that we're actually breathing in molecules of, and that's how we're able to detect that thing as a smell. And so when the body comes in contact with various VOCs or smell particles, that is a big trigger for a reaction. And unfortunately, once the immune system has become so sensitized to various chemical classes, even natural things like, the smell of wet soil or a flower can be something that the immune system is reacting to. And that is something that is very unfortunate when you're dealing with chemical sensitivity, when you've kind of reached that stage. Oftentimes the objectively toxic sort of artificial chemicals that we might get in laundry detergents, cleaning chemicals and stuff like that are bigger triggers, but there is overlap there, because you reach a point where the body is just perceiving like everything as a threat. So I think that's a pretty good summary of what MCS is, and I look forward to making more videos about sort of what the daily experience is living with MCS, techniques that we can do to avoid exposures. And I'm also very curious to get your thoughts on anything that I've mentioned here. If there's anything you think that I missed, please go ahead and just leave a comment. So thank you for watching, and hope you have a great day. Peace.